Hey everybody, welcome to the lecture for Unit 2, Unit T. Here is your vocabulary list for the week. Make sure to look those words over and look them up and pepper them into your discussion board posts this week. So what is this concept? The idea of unity is that it's synonymous with harmony. It means all elements belong together, and it represents a balance of the parts and the whole. So we're not just seeing the forest, we're not just seeing the trees, we are seeing it all come together. So I'll start you off with one of the great images from art history, Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. And I think this is just a perfect example of a painting that has overall unity. Van Gogh has his very distinctive choppy brush strokes that construct the entire piece like a mosaic. All of those little brush strokes fit together in such a way that you almost feel like his entire world is built out of these kind of sculpted out of these dashes of paint. That the sky and the universe and that cypress tree in the foreground, the houses and buildings in the town below, and the rolling fields, they're all just sort of kind of constructed out of the same material. And visually, it just all works together. Your eye is led through it all. We just feel this this wonderful harmony in this piece as we stare up at the infinite starry sky. When designing fonts, any designer who has taken on this challenge has had to come up with a way of making a whole series of symbols, all of the letters and numbers and punctuation marks, look like they belong together, make them feel like they are of the same. And that's a challenge that's not always super easy. Not, you know, some fonts are more effective than others. I think this Bauhaus font is a nice one that just shows kind of a distinctive style throughout the entire alphabet and through all the numbers, and that, you know, we get a real sense of unity from that I don't know, collection of symbols. Repetition is something that can be key to getting getting a feeling of unity within a work of art or design. We saw the repeated brush strokes in Van Gogh's painting. In this photograph here, this is not a digital mock-up. This is a singular photograph of a whole bunch of cats. And that repetition of the cat form, the ears, the eyes, over and over again, kind of creates this sense of unity within this picture. And continuing with the cute animal images for a moment, we've got the elephants here, and I think the trunk, that snaking form of the trunk, of the three different trunks that we see, and even echoed in the leg on the right-hand side. There are these wonderful curves that just get repeated, and it just makes for a lovely photograph that just is all constructed of very similar forms. One fairly common way of trying to achieve consistency, unity, harmony with is through the use of the grid, and we find this is done in a lot of different ways. Web design is certainly anchored in this, as is book design. The layout for any social media platform, whatever it happens to be, is oftentimes anchored to a grid. So I've got a page, the online page of the Portland Press Herald here, and you can see that there's kind of three distinct columns that the news and the puzzles ended up in. Across the top, there's a band with little, selections there. And there's a structure that is created that helps organize the material so that it's not just a great big jumble. So this is often done using a grid. When you read your textbook for this chapter, I would recommend opening up and just kind of flipping through the pages and looking at how there's a basic setup that each page follows, from some pages there might be a big photo or a couple of smaller photos or several smaller photos. The amount of text is going to vary, but the cells that it lands within are going to follow fairly similar patterns that make that book have a unity from page to page to page, that you can tell it's all from the same book. And a different designer would have come up with a different way of putting together that book. Artists use the grid as well, and there's various different ways that artists can work within it. Here we're seeing Andy Warhol's Marilyn diptych. We've got the repetition of that same face over and over again with the different silk screens set up within the grid pattern. But then we also see that there's some variety in here as well. It's a repetition of the same image, but it's printed slightly differently each time. Especially as we get into the right-hand side, some of them are streaky and some of them have low contrast. And we start to see variety within the repetition within the unity. Variety within the unity. Yes, something like that. Piet Mondrian is well known for these paintings, which are he did many of these paintings that on a white field, the black bands, and then some of the sections were filled in this case with a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, and he often used blue in these as well. And these were something of a in some ways there's something of an experiment or something of an exercise in finding balance and harmony. There's the structure of the grid setting up, the grid sets up the structure, and then he's choosing a minimal way of filling in just a little bit of color to help lead the eye around and find harmonious compositions within that. Now, a painting like this is less obviously using the grid. It might not be the first thought we have because we look and we see, oh, it's a building, it's a city scene. But as you kind of think about it in the context of the other images, there are strong vertical and horizontal lines. There's the repeated structure of the windows that have a similar shape to them. And we could say, oh yeah, this is, this painting is constructed within the use of a grid, and we can come in and out of, as we look through it, we come in and out of the box of that grid as we would as we would read a website or a book in the way we were just talking about. And I would even suggest that this photograph again, in some ways is a loose use of the grid. We can kind of look for, certainly some strong vertical lines throughout the composition. The horizontals are a little less, less true. But there is a certain amount of structure here that is created that also echoes the idea of the grid. Now, I already used the phrase unity with variety, and this is something that comes up in the book and would be a good one to try to wrap your heads around. We're talking about unity having repetition of certain forms, or having something that the whole thing seems like it's made out of. But within that unity, we sometimes want to vary things. So if this Keith Haring image is in black and white, we see a unity with all of the with all of the marks that he makes throughout there that sort of ties this together and makes it a unified image. But this painting is actually in color and limited color, but that red and green with the black paint changes things when we look at it as a color image. And suddenly those sort of animated anthropomorphic dogs dominate the composition and really jump out at us in a way that they might not have been the first thing that caught your eye when you saw this in black and white. So I would say there's a certain amount of unity that we are seeing here when we see this image in black and white. And when we add the red and green to it, we get some variety, which helps make certain things pop out and contrast against other things as well. So I think anytime you can find a way to balance, I think, I guess if things are too unified, sometimes it can get boring and visually boring. And sometimes, if you can find a way to animate certain areas or have them contrast in a new and different way, sprinkle in that little bit of variety, then it shakes things up a little and makes it more interesting. This is sort of a well, this photograph, it says a rescuer walks past damaged cars at the site of the explosion in Tianjin, China in 2015. So kind of a aftermath of a horrible scene. The photograph has this repetition of all of these car forms over and over again. I should note it's a photograph. Some students, I've shown this picture before, and I think it presents as a drawing. It looks like it could have been drawn in charcoal and chalk. But this is actually a photograph. It just has the dust from the aftermath of this explosion that's coating everything. But this repetition of form, you get the unity that's created through through the repetition of those car forms over and over and over again. But then, you know, it's a little bit, it's almost on a grid, but it's somewhat skewed. And then there's variety in there with the lone figure in the center, those streaks of white that go from top to bottom there, and that sort of thing. And then the big thing I wanted to discuss this week was Gestalt theory. This is something that can be a little bit hard to wrap your heads around. I definitely need to pay careful attention reading this section of the book. And this is something that's going to come up a lot. These little subsets of Gestalt that I'm going to talk about now are going to be they're going to come up in your on your midterm project and elsewhere, and it's something that I want to make sure that everybody really has a solid grasp on. So, what is Gestalt? It is this idea that objects which share visual characteristics such as shape, size, color, texture, or value will be seen as belonging together in the viewer's mind. And so we get images like this. There's a similarity. There are things that tie these images together, and our brain wants to fill in the blanks. So instead of just seeing a series of black dots with little arrow-like shapes emblazoned on them, our brain wants to make sense of this. We want to understand it, and we will construct the idea that we are seeing a box in perspective, overlaying those dots. We want to find order in chaos. At the heart of our visual process, our brain wants to make sense of what we see. So similarly in A there, you see you know, three pie shape pieces, but we don't read them as three separate things. We see them as, or we might read them as three separate circles, but our brain will fill in the blank and assume that they're complete circles, and that there is a white triangle a single white triangle that overlays all three of them. Similarly, we'll see, you know, that ball with the spikes on it below. We'll see it as a ball with spikes. We will see perhaps the Loch Ness Monster in the lower right, and we'll see that other form sort of wrapping around something as well. So the brain wants to fill in and make sense of things that aren't there. We have some different concepts with it. I should also say, as you try to wrap your head around Gestalt theory, take my explanation here, read it in the book. I've also got some additional materials, additional resources in this chapter on Brightspace, and you might want to look at some of those too to help further understand these concepts. We're going to break Gestalt theory down into a few different categories. One of them is the idea of similarity. And similarity, as we see with those dots going along the page here, when you see certain things that are the same, we read them. We're going to read them together. So in this image, I think most of us, when we first look at this image, will immediately see a sort of cross, a plus sign in the middle of, you know, kind of bisecting this image, and that is constructed of squares. There's nothing about those squares that's really, you know, special that makes them feel like they should be more connected than a circle and a square next to each other. But because they are similar, we read them as the same. Likewise, we'll read the four corners as being similar blocks of circles, and that, you know, that's kind of the most basic idea of similarity in Gestalt theory. How does that come into play in visual design? Well, we start to read things that are similar. We group them together and see them as kind of leading the eye through. So this mosaic has a lot of these things that just sort of lead the eye through from here to here, and those similar things work together. Another Keith Haring image, I would say, if you can see my mouse, like these sort of, I don't know, light beams or something coming out of the spaceships. They create a repetition of form that is similar, and so we see those as being of the same. We see certain images also, or some of those same kind of lines, again on these sort of human dog-like forms. And there's different places, or this line here, we're looking for order within this crazy image. And so we find things that are similar, and our eye goes from one to the next of the things that are similar. Proximity is the idea that anything that starts to group together is going to be seen as of a kind. So in this example on the screen, there are many dots, but what our eye kind of organizes it as is we see 1, 2, 3, 4 groups of dots, because they are proximate to each other. They are near each other in those different areas. So this painting is a painting of 5 bowls, but it is a painting of one group of bowls, and we see them, coming together as one cluster, and one compositional element. If we think about, elements within this composition, those 5 bowls sort of read together as a unit. Similarly, in this one, which I believe is in the textbook as well, we see the upper part and dropping down on the left side as one type of thing, because those things are close together and they're similar, and but I'm using the word similar. The vocabulary gets a little bit, it starts to overlap a little bit, because is this similarity or is this proximity? A case could be made sometimes for it to be either. I see this as proximity mostly because I see this group just kind of coming together and reading as one solid mass. I see all of these coming together and reading as something of a sky, maybe something of a building, and the colored ones read as their own as well. I think a case could be made for similarity because these ones are smaller and these ones are bigger, and I don't think it would be necessarily incorrect. And I'd actually be curious to hear if any of you feel like this is more one or the other. That'd be a good one to comment on. As we are talking about proximity, yeah, this one is kind of interesting because you got all these shapes down here and all these shapes up above, and there's a gap in between that's perfectly aligned. And because of that, we read this as perhaps maybe the first thing we see in the composition is one diagonal stripe of white, but that white is only made, it only emerges because the other forms stop short of it. And so we almost imagine that there would be a line that would connect right through these spaces, but it's just the proximity, the closeness of it that makes it read that way. And then we have continuation, and continuation being this idea that one form that has sort of a similar feel to it that kind of moves into the next form, our eye is gonna flow from one area to another. So within this woodcut, we see, our eye just goes from the woman's one arm down to the cat in one continuous flow. And we might even go, if you go up from the cat, from one arm to the other arm, across her body and up her legs. And, we kind of see that continuation there. Similarly, in this painting by Robert Henry, the woman's arm that's outstretched on the couch, it continues into the line that kind of creates that arc of the couch beyond her, like that. So there's this continuity that is created. There's kind of an almost oval shape that's created there, from her arm across there, scooping back down up her body there, and then there's sort of an echo of it over here as well. And in Thomas Aiken's Swimming Hole, we see this wonderful continuity of forms as well. This one's in the book, and I thought I would show you some studies for it as well. Aikens was one of the first artists to use photography as a way to help him plan his compositions. And we also see a study that he did in paint down there as he was working towards, this is the final draft, small in the middle there. But in each one, you see this sort of clustering of the forms. I think this one down here, I would say, demonstrates the idea of proximity pretty well, because everybody's kind of clustered together a lot tighter. But the one, the final draft, I think, has more of this continuation as we go from one form into the next. And this one up here has wonderful continuation as well, I would say. This image, the different forms almost become one, as one form kind of flows into the next, with these synchronized swimmers. And in this painting by Shi Tao, these abstract forms do a similar thing of just going from one to the next and just leading your eye through the composition. We kind of just keep going around and around. As I said, some painting or some examples are going to be more obviously one type of Gestalt theory as compared to another one. And I would be curious about this one, whether people see this as being a better example of continuation, because the forms kind of, you know, move down from one to the next, or if you see this more as similarity, as one vegetable or fruit form to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. It's kind of, I think that might be an example of a combination of both of them. This one as well, I think, could be read somewhat as continuity and somewhat as similarity. And then another part of Gestalt theory is the idea of figure and ground, which is also talked about in terms of positive and negative space. And the examples on the screen here are both ones that have an ambiguous use of figure and ground, positive and negative space, so that it's unclear which is figure and which is ground. So if we look at the figure down here, this guy with the backwards baseball hat drinking a bottle of something, we could see this as the figure and then the surrounding light area as ground. Or we suddenly notice that this shape here becomes a head, and this becomes figure, and the area around it becomes ground. And similarly up here, you've got the cup, but you've also got two faces and profile coming into it. So negative space is defined as that the areas in and around the positive forms. This is a negative space drawing, the kind that some of you may have had to do in a drawing class. And it's an extreme example of thinking about negative space in the forefront and pushing the positive forms to the back. Normally, if we were to try to draw this picture of these plants and other objects, we would really want to draw each and every leaf. We'd want to make sure there's lines that were chopping up spaces in the spaces in here, that we see each individual leaf and all the other objects differentiating themselves from the other. And oftentimes when people draw, they get so caught up looking at the shapes of the things that they forget to think about the shapes, the interlocking pieces that work around them. And so in learning to draw, it's a common practice to teach, to do an exercise of getting you to look and to focus and to try to draw just the spaces in between, and in this case, color them in black. Ultimately, this is supposed to lead to the idea that when you do a drawing, you should be looking at both the positive and negative shapes as interlocking puzzle pieces, that you don't get one without the other. And if you get the shape of the negative space right, you're going to get the shape of the positive space right. If you draw the positive form wrong and you're not sure what's wrong about it, you can look at those negative spaces and see what it is about them that that could be better. Now, how does this come into play for other types of design? If you're taking photographs, or if you're, doing things that are not about drawing, well, looking at an interesting relationship between the positive and negative forms is essential to great design. And thinking about those relationships in this particular picture, I find it really compelling because there are great shapes in the light and in the dark. In this painting, we've got the artist has kind of found the silhouette of the woman's body to have a really interesting shape, and in order to accentuate that shape, he's placed her against a dark background, and even kind of not just a solid dark background, because you end up with a shape like this that is an interesting form, or a shape like this that's an interesting form. If you imagine panning out and having more space around her, you'd lose some of that interesting those interesting shapes that fill in the corners here and there. So it's a reminder that every square inch of a composition is important, and you want to think about whether you want to zoom in on your subject or pan out, and how you can utilize figure and ground, positive and negative shape, for your best advantage. The Greeks were great at this. They really did a lot of composing for the positive and negative shapes, the figure and ground relationships, and getting the images to really pop out. In this case, the pale red image against the dark background. And every positive shape is interesting. Every negative shape is interesting. The interaction between those shapes is all very interesting. Michelangelo, who would have been looking at those examples of Greek pottery and been inspired by them. This is his first known painting, and this really wonderfully weird image that has an incredible use of figure and ground, positive and negative shape. And then there's this sort of ambiguous use of figure and ground, where like in the first examples I showed, where things come in and out and you're not sure which is figure and which is ground, which is supposed to come forward and which is supposed to recede. In this unknown work by an unknown artist from the 19th century, we've got these two women lovers who are, their faces emerge, they come out at us, but then they recede as they become the eyes of the skull. And then designers like to have fun with this kind of stuff as well. And here's a really lovely example of utilizing figure and ground dynamics, positive and negative shape, so that it's a food and wine festival. We've got a fork and we've got wine bottles, very simply and elegantly designed like that. Or a similar but more powerful image. This one, in a statement against sexual assault, we have that hand between the legs there. So to recap some of this stuff, in Gestalt theory, we've got, if we take this example of just a bunch of floating triangles that aren't really coming together in any particular way, when they start to cluster up like that, we have proximity. Here we have two groups of the triangles that group up, and that is proximity. When they seem to go from one to the next to the next to the next and lead the eye through the composition in that way, that's when we're talking about continuation. And so the continuation in this one, in the bigger group, goes from one triangle to the next to the next to the next, and it even hops over the space and comes into these ones over here as well. So you've just got that continuing on and leading the eye through the composition. And then the idea of similarity, I chose to do this one with color, so that we kind of distinguish that band of the ones that have been turned purple, that those are going to distinguish themselves from from all of the other forms in the picture, because they have a similar element that sets them apart. And then, of course, figure and ground is that idea of positive and negative space. One thing comes forward, the other drops back, and it sometimes can be questionable about whether, is this is the black triangle coming forward against a larger pale colored triangle, or is the stack of three triangles coming forward, whatever, is one coming forward or one going back. Sometimes it's not always clear, or not always intended to be clear. I hope that helps with your understanding of some of these concepts. I know that some of these are a little tricky and that they overlap and that it's not always clear. So if any of this was confusing to you and you have any questions about it, then you might want to put some of that in your response. If you find some great examples of these, obviously we want everybody to get an example on the board, so on the discussion board. So please find something great that illustrates one of these concepts. Dig deep, try to find something interesting. Remember that your design examples can be from any from any type of two-dimensional design work. So it can be photographs or paintings or graphic design or various things, the type of stuff that I show. Make sure you cite the source and that we know where it came from. So good luck with that, and I look forward to your responses. Thanks, everybody.